Good afternoon. Today is January the 13th, 2023. This is Just Thinking with Patriot News Network. I wanted to touch on something that I believe is kind of sneaking up on us, and we've kind of put something off to the side, right? So, the food crisis is something that has been talked about for several months. And I think what happened was the timing has gotten people to brush it off, right? Because, like, oh, I went to the grocery store yesterday. I mean, yeah, things are a lot more expensive, but the food's still there, right? You have to understand the cycle of food. You have to understand the planting, the harvesting, the distribution, the manufacturing, the distribution, the storing, then the delivery, then the put on the shelf, right? So there's a process that goes along, and a lot of people just simply don't know that process. But what I want to talk about today is the U.S. and global war on farmers is definitely intensifying amid food shortages. We see a lot of farmers that are on TikTok. We see a lot of farmers on social media that are screaming at the top of their lungs. They are trying to simply warn us what is coming. Now, I don't know why in America and in this world we have all of a sudden stopped listening to the people that are trying to warn us. You know, we had these doctors coming out about the jibby jab and about taking certain medicines, and these are people that are renowned in their field, and all of a sudden they're a joke, they're a clown, they're not somebody to listen to. If I've got farmers screaming at me, telling me at the top of their lungs, you are going to experience food shortages. They are making life miserable for us. They are taxing us beyond belief. They are putting so many regulations on us. We can't do our job. We're losing money every time we try to make a crop or harvest a crop. I think I'm going to listen to them. What do they really have to lose by coming out and telling us that? Trying to get views on TikTok or something? Like, for you to dismiss that, something has to be not right with you, right? So, the effects of what critics have described as a global war on farmers and ranchers is becoming more apparent. But even as food shortages intensify, governments, including the Biden administration, are definitely cracking down harder on agriculture production. So, experts and lawmakers who spoke to the Epoch Times warned that it's a time to rein in government policies that are harming the poor the most. A Republican congressman said that the Republican led Congress would begin work immediately upon taking control. Now, the only problem with that is once it gets through the Republican led Congress, then it has to go to the Democratic led Senate. Right. And then ultimately, if it passes that, then it can be vetoed by the Democratic president. While the attacks on agriculture and related industries look different in different nations, many experts say it's a coordinated global policy being promoted by, of course, no other than the UN, United Nations, and the World Economic Forum, the European Union, and other international forces determined to transform civilization. I mean, they want us eating bugs now, right? It's a great source of protein. Yeah, I'll pass. In July, the Epoch Times had published an in-depth investigative piece that was citing multiple professionals in the field who said that the UN-backed policies on climate change and, of course, the evil two words, sustainable development, which they described as a war on farmers, were directly responsible for escalating this food crisis, right? So it's a coordinated effort, which we're seeing across the globe on many different fronts for many different aspects. It is a coordinated effort. It's not just happening in America. It's not just happening in Canada. It's not just happening in Europe. It's not just happening in Germany. It's happening all over the world, right? And we can't really ignore this any longer, or this is going to become a problem we can't undo. Now, we know that Russia and Ukraine have been at war, and Russia provides, I believe it's something to the tune of 40% of the world, their fertilizer. So you have to ask yourself, even if you're not a farmer, even if you don't know how to grow anything, I'm a terrible green thumb. I would say it's a pretty safe bet to say that if a country that gives the entire world 40%, nearly half of its fertilizer, has not been producing it, that's going to create a problem for growing things. And if things aren't growing, then I'm going to have to say at some point it's going to hit the supply chain and we're going to suffer from that. I don't need to be a farmer. I don't need to be a gardener. I don't need to be a whatever other name they have for that in order to know that, in order to be smart enough to figure that out. It's kind of common sense, right? The result of the policies targeting the agriculture producers is starting to become extremely clear. With the food shortages becoming more acute around the world, think Sri Lanka, right? But on a global scale, at least if the current trends continue. And if you don't know, Sri Lanka was out of food. And you can't just, if you start running low on food, you can't just run out to the field and plant something and have some food quickly, right? It's a very long process. And it has to be the right time of year to plant something in many, many environments, right? And so, and then many environments need that fertilizer. So, people dismissing this food crisis, you are sadly mistaken. And it just takes a little bit of critical thinking to realize that this is something that you should take extremely seriously. So the UN leaders and Western officials are discussing it openly. President Joe Biden, for example, he was citing the conflict in Ukraine, warned earlier this year that real food shortages are coming very soon. So he's telling you it's coming. Now, they're not reiterating it and harping on it because they don't want you to be ready. But they're going to come back and say, hey, you don't remember back here on this date? We told you about it. Why didn't you prepare for it? Why didn't you make sure you and your family were prepared? The United Nations World Food Program Executive Director David Beasley has been warning since the start of COVID-19, the crisis of devastating global food shortages that could lead to famine of biblical proportions, as he put it, in dozens of nations. Of course, at that time, we had a lot of lockdowns and people weren't working at their jobs to produce food. And you have to understand something when a food shortage starts. Now, America gets about 90% of its food internally. That means we produce about 90% of our own consumption. We export a lot of food. And to flip that around, China imports about 90% of their food. That means they only produce about 10% of what they consume food-wise. So with that being said, when food crises will start and food shortages start to happen, which they already are, you're going to get other countries that scale back on exporting their food because they're going to say, hey, well, yeah, we need the money, but I don't think we should be sending our food out. Things are looking a little scarce. We better save that for us. So does that mean America's going to be okay? I'll get to that in a minute. The answer is no, because they're attacking us in many different ways in America to make sure that we're not okay. But for somebody like China, it would be actually extremely detrimental. So the world must open its eyes to this unprecedented global food crisis and act now to stop it spinning out of control. Now, that's what he had said last month at the World Food Day event, which was in September. And that was hosted, of course, by none other than United Nations agency led by a member of the Chinese Communist Party, of course. In fact, with farmers and ranchers under growing regulatory pressure, numerous authoritative sources are warning that even wealthy countries such as the United States could start seeing supply chain issues in food and other critical sectors in the months ahead. There's a lot of regulations that are being put on farmers. It was Norway, I believe, that 3,000 of the farmers gave up their farms because they could not meet the regulations that were put on them by the government. So they ended up just giving up their farms, and those farms provide, I believe, half of the European unions with their agriculture. 50% of their food. So not only are they going to freeze to death, they're going to starve to death. And this is all at the government's hands. This is all by regulations because cows fart and it ruins the environment. Just crazy. I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So suffering in Europe, which I was just talking about, in Europe, the cracks in the system are starting to show. Already an increasingly number of items are missing from supermarket shelves as the prices are skyrocketing there in the UK and Germany. The escalated shortages at stores have made headlines for weeks with the empty shelves. Numerous nations around the world, especially in the Middle East and in Africa, are already facing major food crises. And with the UN-backed sustainable policies by governments and the financial industry decimating energy systems and agricultural production, the pain is likely to increase. So this is what the experts are saying. Why should we listen to them? They're just experts in their field, right? So also, again, with the cost of energy going through the roof, and of course, the cost of water going up, this is increasing the cost onto the farmers, which is making it not profitable for them to do their job. So if you went to work and you had to travel X amount of distance to work and you had to spend X amount of money on gas and food where you were there and blah, 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 blah. And by the time you got done, you didn't make any money. Would you keep doing that job? The answer, of course, is no, you would not. So it's especially hard on the poor, according to Dr. E. Calvin Bisnier, president of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation and a leading Christian authority on environmental issues. He blasted the anti-farming policies, supposedly aimed at fighting climate change, when all it's doing is starving us. Banning or reducing the use of the nitrous fertilizers in the name of fighting global warming is crazy. It's nonsense, right? We've been using these forever. And all of a sudden now it's this huge issue, right? The policies pursued by these governments around the world in response to the UN advocacies, this is the UN pushing this, right? And this is the World Economic Forum, whom, by the way, nobody has elected for anything. This is just a group of elites that come together to form an organization that now tells us how we should live our life and has massive influence because Klaus Schwab has single-handedly taken over local city councils, taken over local DAs, taken over state positions. And when I say taken over, it means he's put money behind people he wants in office. Police chiefs, governors, the Senate, the House, and he's done it in every country of influence across it, single-handedly, I might add. Pretty impressive if you want to give him credit for it, right? So nitrous oxides are a bit player in the overall greenhouse effect, overshadowed by hundreds of times of carbon dioxide and thousands by water vapor, right? So the infrared wavelengths in which nitrous oxides absorb are almost completely absorbed already. So they can contribute only to a very insignificant amount of global warming, enough not even to measure. So the fact that this has been said cannot be scientifically backed and proven, but they're still pushing forward with the agenda. And this is starving people and raising the cost of people's grocery bill should tell you exactly what the true agenda is. But their contribution to human well-being is immense, right? As they multiply crop yields per acre, they give us better harvest, they give us more food, and it decreases the per hour of labor cost because they're getting a bigger yield, the per input of capital, making the food more abundant and less expensive for you and me. And the poor benefit more than anyone from that. Because if you go to the store and an apple is 30 cents a pound versus $1.40 a pound, which they are now or something like that, is determined whether a majority of the people don't buy them or they do. And what's really crazy is I'll now look at the produce section of a store And you can tell that the cost is drastically improving or drastically proving who's buying it or not, because now I'm watching these huge mounds of avocados that have almost tripled in price, of apples that have tripled in price, of all these different things that have gone up exponentially. They're sitting in the bins and they're literally rotting away. So instead of putting it at a price where people can afford it, they're making it to where people can't, and they'd rather see it rot than people be able to get it and eat it. Insanity. It's insanity. The war on farmers is very simple. It's the war on the poor, and they want it that way. So the war on farmers has been observed clearly in Holland, Sri Lanka, South Africa, Canada, and of course, many other nations, even in the United States. Like I said, they are coming after the farmers in the US big time. In public pretext for the policies, including the planet, of course, from the alleged man-made climate change, dealing with the various other environmental issues, improving economic efficiency, and even giving lands to indigenous people, right? So you can't farm on this land, we need to give it to indigenous people. It's just a way to stop the growth of food. But critics say that the true motivation, it's much, much, much darker. The ultimate goal of powerful international actors, according to the international organizations such as the World Economic Forum, behind many of these policies resulting in food insecurity, is to restructure every element of life on Earth, right? So from rethinking private property rights to drawing up new social contracts, everything they want transformed. The WEF leader, to say it nicely, Klaus Schwab, and his organization have argued for years while promoting that they refer to as the Great Reset. What's amazing to me is Klaus Schwab wrote a book that says COVID-19, the Great Reset. He literally outlined how they were going to do this. And yet people think people that talk about it are conspiracy theorists. The writing is literally in black and white for you to go look at. So the Ranchers and Cattlemen Action Legal Fund United Stock Growers of America, known as R-CAF, USA for short, represents the cattlemen and the ranchers across the whole entire nation. The group is sounding the alarm about the dangers of the United Nations and the World Economic Forum agenda. They're trying to tell you that this is coming. It's kind of like a lot of people are suddenly unaliving. And we had several experts that were trying to tell us 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, don't do this, don't take this, this is what's going to happen. But they were labeled as crazy or just, my question is to you, what did they have to gain? The only thing they had to gain was doing what was morally right. They had everything to lose, and a lot of them have lost a lot of things. Their career, they're constantly attacked, but they still are fighting. Now the ranchers are trying to tell us, hey, you're going to suffer big time with this food crisis. So what's happening is the globalists have an agenda that can best be affected by targeting the low-hanging fruit, right? So the trend was obvious when the Dutch government declared the war on the nation's farmer. I can't remember what I said earlier, but it is the Dutch farmers. It's the Netherlands, I believe. It's 3,000 farms. So what they're doing is they're targeting a segment of the agriculture industry least capable of absorbing the additional regulatory costs, right? So they put these regulations in that are going to cost them money, and they go after the ones that their profit margin's really small. Right. So when governments impose these policies, those that can withstand these added costs are, of course, the big, large agribusinesses, not the mom and pop farmers, the ones that are mega corporations. Right. So once again, another way to squeeze mom and pop out of the picture. Walmart did it with mom and pop stores. Amazon did it with mom and pop stores. And then here's how we're going to do it to the mom and pop ranchers. So this is an attempt to eliminate the independent farmers and ranchers all around the world. And that governments and international organizations, they're working together in an effort to make sure that happens. They're putting in these policies and they're putting in these regulatory costs that they know that they cannot absorb. They know this because they know the cost of it. They know what their profits are, and they know they're not going to be able to make it. Cattle producers and farmers and ranchers are the front line. They're the ones that are being targeted because they're the easiest ones to get out. They know that these big giant agribusinesses can absorb the cost. They know that. That's why they're doing it. And then when those mom and pop ranchers and farmers and cattle producers get out of the way, that just increases the amount of business that the agribusinesses will end up doing, right? So they'll just get bigger, right? So pointing to the numerous Biden administration policies that are targeting farmers, you will see farmers and ranchers dropping like flies. They're already screaming to us on social media about it's happening to them. The end goal is, of course, to further consolidate and centralize the food production by transnational globalist elites, international tribunals, and, of course, the World Economic Forum and every other one. So the purpose is if they condense the food to a few corporations in each country, which a lot of them are, but the agriculture side, the fruits, the vegetables, the cattle, the chickens, a lot of that is, there's still a good chunk of that done by the mom and pops, but now they're ready to take them all out, right? So all this originates with the UN Sustainable Agenda, that Agenda 2030, Agenda 21, which you can read, and you should have by now, and if you haven't, shame on you, and the multinational corporations all involved in influencing and working with the UN. And of course, these big companies are going to support these moves. Why? Because it increases their business and gets mom and pop out of the way, right? So the global elites, they're pushing for sustainability, which is described the latest denomination of false idol worship that should put the fear of God into all of us. All they want is everything, and they just want it all. And your ability to generate a living with your private property is going to be their first victim. That's what they want. They don't want you to have an option to not do what they want you to do. The UN backed policies, right? The United Nations. So the UN World Economic Forum behind the global war on farmers and experts, a number of UN Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, they're directly linked to the global war on these farmers, right? So the goals, which were developed with help from the CCP and have been adopted by the governments worldwide, call for the drastic changes in agriculture production and even the consumption, right? So they've been regularly cited by the governments in developing these very policies that many knowledgeable parties blame for the food crisis. So the World Economic Forum actually signed an official strategic partnership with the UN, right? So they're getting in bed together, designated to bring these major businesses around the world into the movement and to impose this Agenda 2030 goals. So what they're saying is, we'll pull in these major business, these big corporations, right? Because big corporations are the shadow government. They're the ones that really run things. So we'll pull these guys in and we'll say, we're going to give you the piece of the pie as long as you go along with our agenda, our agenda, right? Because our agenda is to get the mom and pops out of the way, which are going to increase your profits. But when we say do something, you're going to have to do it, right? These are kind of the backdoor deals that are made. So the text of the deal promises to deepen the institutional engagement and jointly accelerate the implementation of this 2030 agenda for sustainable development. The UN-backed government policies are targeting the energy sector, which are also playing a major role in development for food shortages. You know, again, it takes energy, you know, whether it be the diesel for the tractor, whether it be the water for the fields, whether it be the electricity used in the warehouses for the farming, whatever the case may be. And they're just jacking the cost up on everything. So, for instance, Europe's efforts to phase out reliable power sources, such as the hydrocarbon energy and the nuclear power, It's producing devastating effects on the European industry. You are going to see the collapse of the European manufacturing industry, farming industry. It's already in the middle of collapsing as we speak. So not only are they they don't have the gas to heat their homes, they're going to have heating stations in public libraries. They're going to have food shortages because of the 3,000 farms they got rid of that produce half their agriculture. And then they've got rid of the hydrocarbon and the nuclear power energy. It's just ludicrous. They're collapsing it on purpose. But especially it's been a hard hit has been in the fertilizer production, which is obviously extremely critical to agriculture input. The prices of fertilizer has soared. Food production has already been compromised. And then, of course, the shortage, supply and demand, which is going to increase the prices are surging. Somebody said on TikTok the other day they paid $11 for a 12 pack of eggs. $11. That's almost $1 an egg. That's normally what you would pay for. That's normally what you would pay for an egg at like a restaurant after they cook it. Yeah, I mean, this is people better wake up. In the United States, the Biden administration, the bureaucracies and the Congress have also been targeting the agriculture, energy. Of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, for instance, is going to see taxpayers pay farmers to not farm. Now, we were talking about this on TikTok, right? Now, of course, they're going to do this under the guise of implementing climate-friendly agriculture crop rotation, which means they're saying, oh, well, you don't grow on your land, we're rotating it, and you don't grow on your land, and we'll pay you not to grow on your land. Now, do you remember about 18 months ago or 12 months ago on TikTok, there were some of us that were saying, like, hey, they're paying farmers to destroy their crops. And people are like, oh, you're so crazy. Why would they do that? They just put it in the Inflation Reduction Act. They're going to pay farmers not to farm. So how crazy were we? It's pretty tough being right so much. You know what I'm saying? The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, has also angered farmers nationwide because they proposed regulation that would force them to track the emissions if they do business with a publicly traded company. So let's say you're a farmer that produces corn and you sell to, say, somebody like ConAgra, who is a publicly traded food company, then you would have to track your emissions every time you crank up that tractor, every time your cow farts. I guess you got to count that too. So it's not just the government. No. The major banks and the investment managers around the world have also signed on to these UN policies that's contributing to the food crisis. In fact, a coalition of 19 attorney generals from mostly Republican states is investigating possible collusion between 6 of the largest U.S. banks and the UN's Net Zero Banking Alliance. So you have J.P. Morgan, I believe, who is part of it. Bank of America, I believe, is a part of it. So they are going to track based on what you charge on your card, and also give that information to the government and to these to the WEF, the UN, and so forth. So, as participants in the UN program, the banks agreed to pursue this net zero emissions by 2015 by ending or radically scaling back the investment or lending to traditional energy producers and agriculture interests. So what they're saying is, well, we just won't loan the farmers money. And see, what happens is these farmers, what they do is they have a crop coming. They get a loan from the bank because the bank knows, okay, let's say they're going to base it on an 80% yield. So they'll give them the loan of that 80%, and that allows them to go get everything moving and going. And then, of course, when the harvest comes and they get paid, they pay the bank back on a interest-bearing loan. But they're saying, hey, we're just not going to give you any more money. So the multiple state attorney generals that are involved in the investigation told the Epoch Times that this collusion by the U.S. banks with the UN is undermining American agriculture and the industry, and it's only benefiting the CCP. So our own money is being weaponized against us. That is crazy. And why would these banks do this? Because these banks, I don't know for sure, but I'm sure these banks are being promised other endeavors that they'll be getting money off of, right? So U.S. lawmakers have also become increasingly concerned about the targeting of agriculture producers with government policy and pressure from financial service providers, right, from the banks. So John Rose, he's a Republican from Tennessee, owns and operates a farm that's been in his family for more than 230 years. And he also served as an agriculture commissioner in Tennessee before he got elected into Congress in 2012. So he's concerned about regulatory overreach impacting farmers and the very real threat of food shortages. Rose did organize fellow congressmen to make their voices heard. In the first letter to the SEC chief, Rose and more than 115 members of Congress called for the agency to reject the significant and unworkable regulatory burden being imposed on these agricultural communities, right? So they're saying this isn't going to work. Now, they did send a second letter, and Rose and almost every single Republican on the House Committee on Financial Services appointed to the recent Supreme Court ruling against the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, which is just, whatever. Establishing emissions caps on the power generation as evidence that the SEC lacked the authority to move forward, right? So with an interview with the Epoch Times, Rose said that when the Republicans retake the House, they do intend to unleash aggressive oversight and rein in the regulatory abuses targeted against the agriculture and other sectors. But the problem, once again, is yes, the Republicans control the House, but the Democrats control the Senate. And then you have a Democratic president who obviously is in agreement with all of this because that's his administration that's been pushing all this, who can, with a stroke of a pen, veto anything that comes to his desk. Now, I don't think that these policies are necessary and appropriate, he said, noting that there was a nexus with the UN agenda and that the pressure being put on the farmers was very worrisome. So we see the Biden administration using regulatory muscles to effectuate this green agenda through overreach. And in addition to the SEC's proposal on emissions reporting that's going to crush these small farmers, it's just going to totally obliterate them. Rose pointed to the Biden administration's efforts to expand the federal control of the water resources. So they broaden the definition of waters of the United States. So the EPA has been taking some very aggressive steps with respect to the necessary crop protection tools that farmers actually use, and even suspending the access after farmers have purchased these supplies. This isn't helpful to the farming industry. It's in fact quite the opposite, right? So he went on to say that he dealt directly with farmers who are being harassed using regulatory overreach with previous waters of the United States policies during the Obama years, and had given to federal agencies. And it's really having a deterrent effect on agriculture production. Right now, this is the U.S. saying, well, you can't use this water. It's ours, right? It's for, whatever. Who knows what they pull out of their what. The end result of these types of policies against these farmers, obviously, he said, will be continuing shortages and deterred production around the world, right? Now, we do export a lot. So by these things happening here, this will also affect our ability to export, which will affect other countries' ability to import and have enough food to eat. It's all a very delicate, intertwined deal. And once you start disrupting certain factors of it, then it will continue. Pardon me for 1 second. This is all self-inflicted, so it is on purpose. He went on to say that we have to take stock of the fact that we can't implement policies that will lead to shortages of something that is vital, like food. He said, calling that obvious and noting that farmers must continue feeding the world. Now, this is all a formula for famine around the world. So if you look at everything that we've been talking about, the only outcome that this can produce is famine. The same is true in the energy sector, pointing to the policies that are deterring for the exploration and development of resources. So we're going to have a famine for electricity. You can't say famine, but we're going to have a shortage for electricity. Those two are pretty important things in your life, aren't they? Electricity and food. It doesn't really make sense to have our head in the sand on these issues, he said. So everybody's concerned about the environment, but this religious zeal where they've turned green concerns into this mantra to live by is a huge mistake. He went on to say that they will see a decidedly focused effort to conduct appropriate oversight of the Biden administration and various regulators, including in financial services. But again, we're up against a hill here, right? So we have the Democratic Senate. He's went on to say, we will have strident, forceful oversight. He said, noting that the transparency and reining in the abuses would be a key focus to that legislation, and the leverage would, with funding, could be possible tools to stop the administration from intentionally harming the U.S. economy and, of course, the agriculture section in particular. So you will see aggressive moves on all these fronts. Ultimately, tremendous pressure will be brought on to bear. Foreign allies should be encouraged to not make the same sort of policy mistakes that Biden is making, which led to food and energy shortages, according to Rose. So the productive capacity to feed the world is here. We are, in fact, it's growing every year, right? We're able to continue to produce as long as the farmers are not regulated to death, right? So we have proven that we can feed the world. But in order to do that, we have to move forward, and we can't tie one hand behind our back, which is exactly what the Biden administration and these international folks are doing, insisting on this green initiative of what we need to do. And again, this cycle is so delicate that you tie that hand behind the back for 10 minutes, it's going to have a catastrophic reach and result, right? So maybe that's what they want. One of the most common questions that he gets from voters is, what's the hidden agenda? I mean, people understand that if you don't produce oil and you don't have a substitute, what happens? You get brownouts, you get blackouts like in California, requests to not charge your car. That's not practical. The economic ripples that creates led to things like shortages, including food. So here's the thing. Like, I remember when what's his name, the guy in California, Newsom, right? So I was actually in California a few months back, and he goes to announce this thing where everybody's going to have an electric car by 2035, something to that nature, right? Or you had to have an electric car by 2035. Literally 2 days later, I'm driving down Highway 5. It's 88 degrees, right? So it's pretty warm, So it on the sign on the highway, it says, "Please do not turn your ACs above 82. Do not charge car until after 9, I think. Reduce energy consumption." And I'm thinking, so you're going to have everybody plugging their car in like 8 years? I mean, sorry, 8 years. In 13 years, you have everybody plugging in their car, but you can't even and you got to realize, like, a lot of people in California don't even have an air conditioner. So it's not like every single house has an air conditioner. Matter of fact, a lot of them don't. Probably only like, I think 50% of the houses have AC units in there. So you can't run 50% of the houses on AC units and plugging in. By the way, only 1.3% of all cars on the road are electric. Now in California, it's probably like 15%, because I pulled up to a light in California and had 7 Teslas, all white, in my view. Crazy. It's like living in Sims world. So, just it's crazy. So responses from Biden. As the food shortages become more acute, Western political figures, including Biden, of course, have already offered some strong hints about how to respond. So, for instance, in the face of soaring energy prices that experts say were caused by Biden's policies, cutting off the pipeline, not allowing drilling, Biden sounded more like a Venezuelan strongman than a U.S. president, repeatedly blames companies for profiteering. So you cut the pipeline. You don't let them drill new leases. You don't let them drill on federal land. You put up a bunch of red tape for them to drill anywhere else. And then you say that the reason is because they're profiting. And how many of you buy that, which is even more disturbing? In response to the fertilizer shortages, the U.S. Agency for International Development Administrator Samantha Power celebrated what she called a silver lining. So fertilizer shortages are real now, she said on ABC News. And as a result, we're working with countries to think about natural solutions like manure and compost. And this may hasten transitions that would have been in the interest of farmers to make eventually. So, okay, manure, okay, compost. Is that necessarily a bad thing? No. But where's that manure coming from? Is it coming from cows that are being fed growth hormones and antibiotics? And, this creates a whole nother set of questions and problems, right? So Sri Lanka farmers tried that in response to the UN-backed ban on fertilizers by the socialist government there. And it ended in a total disaster. Ironically, the UN, which has, long been supporting climate change and sustainable development policies that experts blame for the food supply issues around the world, is now presenting itself as the answer to the crisis, right? So they create the problem, they create the solution, right? So the international community has a good sense of how to tackle the food crisis. What we need now is a coordinated government action. So more government involvement, right? And the special it's amazing that they create these problems, and then they come out and they act like they've just got the answers, right? They're saying that the government is going to be the solution to the problem. But this problem they've created, it didn't exist before they started putting all these regulations in. So they've created the problem. And of course, their answer is more dependency on the governments. So this guy for the UN, Michael Thackeray, said that he's calling on the governments to set the right conditions for the transition. Of course you are. Of course you are. So the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is a former leader of the Socialist International, has also sounded the alarm about what he described as a global food crisis, right? So he was speaking at an event last month that was hosted by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and which is also the chief of that is, his name is Ku Dongyu, I guess, or something like that, is a member of the CCP. And he's also a former official of the regime in Beijing. No coincidences, right? No coincidences. He said that 3 billion people today can't afford a healthy diet. I would say it's probably well above 3 billion now. Because, like I said, I go to the store and I go down the Little Debbie aisle, the bread aisle that has the Little Debbie. The Little Debbies are gone, wiped out. But you got fruit sitting and rotting at the front of the store. The number of people affected by hunger has more than doubled in the past 3 years. How convenient. Almost 1 million people are living in famine conditions already. And starvation and death is a daily reality for these folks. So government, scientists, the private sector, and the civil society need to work together to make nutritious diets available and affordable for all, he says. Now, is this the eating bugs? I mean, I'm assuming that would be fairly cheap. They're saying it's nutritional. I don't know. The UN and the organization's relevant agencies didn't respond for any comments, of course, when Alex Newman wrote this article for the Epoch Times. We have a lot of really good people who get up from dusk to dawn and bust their ass, break their backs, literally, to feed this country. And they are by no stretch rich in any way, shape, form, or fashion. The most valuable thing they have is their land. They're not making millions of dollars as a mom and pop farmer. But they're willing to do it because they know the importance of the job that they perform and that it feeds the men, the women, and the children of this country. And we are allowing our government, their policies, and other organizations around this world to take it all away from them, which ultimately takes it all away from us. And as we continue to sit back and allow this to happen every day, we're one day closer to finding nothing in our pantry. We're one day closer to finding our store shelves completely empty. We're one day closer to looking at our children and telling them that we have nothing to feed them. We are one day closer to laying on the floor, starving, and thinking, if we would have just done something back then, maybe we wouldn't be here now. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for headlines with Patriot News Network at 10 a.m. And again, Monday, and Just Thinking with Patriot News Network Monday at 3 p.m. I hope that we start to look at these things in a very serious light. We're not far away.